"Your daughter is in there," the little girl said, pointing to the sealed wardrobe. "But when they open it, they find something shocking. Leave a comment saying what you thought of this story with a rating from 0 to 10 and tell me what city you're watching from. I really want to know if you liked my story and get to know you better, so please subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help." Chloe's dirty little finger trembled as she pointed to the locked mahogany wardrobe, her 4 years of age insufficient to comprehend the storm her words would unleash in the life of Arthur Blackwood. The 52-year-old businessman watched the beggar girl with a mixture of desperation and skepticism, while the March rain hammered against the windows of his mansion in Asheville, creating a somber rhythm that echoed his internal anguish. Emily had been gone for 2 days. His 9-year-old daughter, with her always well-combed brown hair and contagious smile, had simply vanished on her way to school on a morning that had begun just like any other. Arthur perfectly recalled every detail of that terrible morning: the farewell kiss on his daughter's forehead, the sound of her school backpack bouncing against her back as she ran down the wet sidewalk, waving cheerfully before turning the corner where her life would change forever. The artisanal confectionery he had built over decades seemed insignificant now. The flavors of fudge, caramel, and pecan brittle that filled his premises every day had completely lost their meaning. Arthur was a practical man, accustomed to solving business problems with logic and determination, but his daughter's disappearance had left him completely lost. His determined personality, which had always helped him in business, had now turned into helpless despair. His tendency to control every situation clashed brutally with the reality that he couldn't protect the most important person in his life. Helen, his wife, spent her days locked in Emily's room, hugging her daughter's dolls and whispering empty promises that everything would be okay. The woman who once radiated strength and optimism was now just a shadow of herself, consumed by the guilt of not having walked her daughter to school that fateful morning. Arthur watched his wife's suffering and felt his third defining characteristic intensify: his desperate need to find solutions, even when they seemed impossible. Chloe had appeared at the mansion's door that rainy afternoon like a strange apparition. Her disheveled hair clung to her thin face, and the torn dress she wore was soaked by the storm. She had asked for food, but her next words made Arthur's heart stop. She knew where the girl with the pretty hair was. She told him things in her dreams. Arthur had every reason to distrust the child. It was obviously a desperate attempt to get food or money, exploiting his emotional vulnerability. But something in Chloe's deep gaze disturbed him. There was an unsettling seriousness in those large, dark eyes, a wisdom that shouldn't exist in such a young child. "She is in the dark place that smells of old flowers," Chloe continued, rocking her body slightly back and forth. "But first you need to look in the wardrobe that never opens. The doll she lost is in there." Arthur froze. Emily had taken her favorite porcelain doll to school that morning, something she never did because she was afraid of losing it. Helen had begged her to leave the toy at home, but Emily had insisted, saying she wanted to show the doll to a new friend. How could this strange girl know about the doll? Helen came down the stairs at that moment, drawn by the voices in the living room. When she saw Chloe, her face twisted into an expression of pain and hope. "Who is she, Arthur?" she asked, her voice hoarse from crying. "She says she knows where Emily is," Arthur replied, watching his wife's reaction, "and she mentioned something about a porcelain doll." Helen's face turned completely pale. She approached Chloe, crouching down to be at the girl's level. "How do you know about the doll, sweetie?" she asked. "The girl with the pretty hair told me. She said you would understand if I showed you where she kept the secret." Chloe pointed again to the mahogany wardrobe. "Inside there is a part she showed me in my dreams." Arthur had known that wardrobe for years. It was an antique piece he had inherited from his grandmother, always kept locked because it held important company documents and some old family belongings. There was never a reason for Emily to be interested in it, and she had never shown any curiosity about its contents. With visibly trembling hands, Arthur retrieved the key from the safe in his office. Helen held her breath as he slowly opened the century-old wardrobe. The smell of old wood and mothballs escaped immediately, mixed with something he couldn't identify. Inside the wardrobe, among piles of yellowed contracts and old family photographs, was a porcelain doll, identical to the one Emily had taken to school. Identical down to the smallest details: the blue dress with white lace, the curly blonde hair, and especially the small mark on the face that made Emily's doll unique. "How is this possible?" Helen murmured, picking up the doll with trembling fingers. This doll was with Emily when she left the house. Chloe smiled for the first time since she had arrived at the mansion, a strange smile that didn't reach her eyes. "She's very close," she whispered, as if sharing a precious secret. "But you need to take care of me first. The lady who looks after me said you would understand when you saw what she left." Arthur felt a shiver run down his spine. There was something deeply unsettling about the way Chloe spoke, as if she were reciting words someone had taught her. "What lady, Chloe? Who looks after you?" "Aunt looks, Rose. She knows you from before. She said it was time for the truth to come out." Chloe looked directly into Helen's eyes with an intensity that made the woman instinctively recoil. "She said you would remember her when you saw the doll." The name hit Helen like a lightning bolt. Rose had worked as a housekeeper in the mansion a few years ago until she was fired after a tense argument about money that had disappeared from her purse. Arthur vaguely remembered the woman, but for Helen, that name brought back much more complex and disturbing memories. "Arthur," Helen whispered, her voice almost inaudible. "We need to talk. Alone." As Arthur took Chloe to the kitchen and offered her food, his mind buzzed with unanswerable questions. How had Emily's doll ended up inside a wardrobe that had been locked for months? Why did a street child know such specific details about his family? And most importantly, what connection existed between his daughter's disappearance and a former employee he barely remembered? Chloe ate the plate of mac and cheese he had served her voraciously, occasionally looking up to observe every corner of the kitchen, as if memorizing all the details. There was something familiar in her gestures, in the way she held the fork, that made Arthur deeply uncomfortable. When she finished eating, Chloe stood up and walked directly to a specific kitchen drawer, opening it as if she knew the house perfectly. From inside, she took out a cloth napkin embroidered with Emily's initials. "She told me you would believe me if I showed you this too," Chloe said, handing the napkin to Arthur. "She said she always hid special things in this drawer." Arthur could barely breathe. That drawer was Emily's secret hiding place, a place where she kept small treasures she collected. Colored pebbles, letters she wrote to herself, and especially that napkin she had embroidered at school as a Father's Day gift. At that moment, through the kitchen window, Arthur saw a woman watching the house from across the street, partially hidden behind a tree. Even from a distance, and after years, he immediately recognized Rose's profile. Arthur ran to the window, but when he looked again, the figure had disappeared. His heart pounded as he tried to process what he had just witnessed. Rose was there watching his house at the exact moment a strange child was demonstrating impossible knowledge about his family's secrets. "Chloe," he said, crouching in front of the girl, "where is your Aunt Rose now?" "She's waiting," Chloe replied with disturbing naturalness. "She said you would want to talk to her after you saw the pretty-haired girl's things." Helen came down the stairs at that moment, her face even paler than before. Arthur immediately noticed that something had changed in her expression. There was fear there, but also a deep guilt he had never seen before. Arthur, I need to tell you about Rose, Helen said, avoiding looking directly at him. There are things you don't know about the time she worked here. What kind of things? Helen looked at Chloe, who was playing with the embroidered napkin as if it were the most precious object in the world. She always asked strange questions about Emily. She wanted to know about her habits, her favorite places in the house, even about her dreams. I thought it was just an employee's affection, but now what, Helen? Now I realized she was studying our daughter. Chloe looked up from the napkin and stared at Helen with an intensity that made the woman tremble. Aunt Rose said you would remember the questions. She said you always knew something was wrong, but you pretended it wasn't. The child's words hit Helen like daggers. It was true. She had felt something strange in Rose's behavior, but she had chosen to ignore the signs because the woman was an efficient employee and Emily liked her. Arthur watched his wife's growing discomfort, and a terrible suspicion began to form in his mind. Helen, why did you really fire Rose? And don't tell me it was just because of the money. Helen closed her eyes, fighting against memories. She preferred to keep buried. I found her once in Emily's room at night when she was supposed to be cleaning the living room. She was smelling the girls' clothes and talking to herself. Talking about what? She was saying things like, "My pretty girl, and soon we'll be together forever." When she saw me, she made up an excuse about checking if the clothes were clean, but there was something in her eyes, something sick. Chloe began to clap her hands happily, as if the conversation were a fun game. Aunt Rose said you would remember that day. She said you got scared, but you did nothing to protect the pretty-haired girl. The accusation in Chloe's childish voice was more devastating than any shout. Helen collapsed into a chair, her hands trembling violently. "She's right," Helen whispered. "I knew something was wrong, but I fired Rose discreetly to avoid trouble. I thought it would be enough. I thought she would just leave our lives." Arthur felt a growing fury burning in his chest. His wife had hidden crucial information about a potentially dangerous woman who had had access to his daughter. "How could you not tell me this? Because I was afraid you'd think I was being paranoid. And because—" Helen paused, struggling with words that seemed to refuse to come out. "Because Rose told me something before she left that terrified me." "What did she say?" "She said she knew secrets about our family. Secrets that could destroy everything if they were revealed." Chloe stopped playing with the napkin and looked directly at Helen. "Aunt Rose said you would tell about the secrets today. She said it was time for the truth." Arthur watched the interaction between his wife and this strange child with a growing fear. It was as if Chloe were an extension of Rose, an extension of her will and knowledge. "What secrets, Helen?" Arthur insisted, his voice taking on an authoritarian tone he only used in the toughest business negotiations. Helen stood up abruptly and began to pace the kitchen like a caged animal. "I can't, Arthur. Not now. First, we need to find Emily." "The pretty-haired girl is waiting for you to understand," Chloe said, standing up too. "She told me her parents need to stop lying to each other before she can come home." The child's words fell like bombs in the tense silence of the kitchen. Arthur looked at Helen, seeing his own confusion reflected in his wife's eyes. How could a 4-year-old child know about marital tensions they barely admitted to themselves? At that moment, the doorbell rang. Arthur went to answer it, finding a thin man of about 40 with simple but clean clothes. "Good afternoon. I'm James Novak, a private investigator. I received an anonymous phone call this morning informing me that you might need help finding a missing child." Arthur frowned. He hadn't contacted any investigator. "Who called you?" "A woman. She didn't identify herself, but she said she knew the family and that there was important information about the case." Before Arthur could respond, Chloe appeared behind him, still holding the embroidered napkin. "Aunt Rose said the question man would come today. She said he would help you understand the clues. James observed the girl with professional interest. And you are? Chloe, I know where the pretty-haired girl is, but her parents need to find out the truth first. James entered the house and quickly assessed the situation. His 15 years of experience as an investigator told him he was dealing with a complex case where the answers were being deliberately portioned out by someone who knew the family intimately. Mr. Blackwood, I need you to tell me exactly what has happened since your daughter's disappearance. Arthur recounted the events of the last 2 days, including Chloe's mysterious appearance and the revelations about the doll and the napkin. James took careful notes, but his eyes remained fixed on the child, who listened to everything with an attention abnormal for her age. Chloe, James said gently, can you tell me about your Aunt Rose? She's taken care of me since I left the place of the crying babies. She said that the parents of special children always forget about the most important children. What place of the crying babies? Chloe tilted her head, as if listening to something only she could hear. The place where babies stay when their parents don't want them. Aunt Rose said she saved me from there because I was special. James exchanged a significant look with Arthur. The child's description suggested she had been abandoned in some kind of institution, possibly an orphanage or hospital. Chloe, how long have you lived with your Aunt Rose? The girl counted on her little fingers, concentrating intensely. A long time, since before I knew how to talk properly. And did she always talk about the Blackwood family? Only after she started working at the confectionery house. She always came back very happy and talked about the pretty-haired girl who would one day be my little sister. The silence that followed was heavy and unsettling. Helen turned even paler, if that was possible, and Arthur felt as if the floor were moving beneath his feet. Your little sister? James repeated, keeping his voice calm. Aunt Rose said that all special children have a little sister they need to find. She said the pretty-haired girl was my little sister, and that one day we would live together in the confectionery house. Arthur looked at Helen, who was now visibly trembling. Helen, you need to tell me everything. Now. Helen covered her face with her hands, sobbing silently. Arthur, there are things about my past that I never had the courage to tell you. What kind of things? Things from before we met. About a daughter that I... Chloe started clapping again, interrupting Helen's confession. Aunt Rose said it was time for you to tell about the daughter she gave to other people to take care of. Chloe's words exploded in the room like a grenade. Arthur looked at his wife, seeing the confirmation of the terrible truth stamped on her devastated face. Helen, he whispered, you had a daughter before we met? Helen nodded slowly, unable to look at her husband. I was 16. My parents forced me to give her up for adoption. Chloe smiled with disturbing innocence. Aunt Rose said I'm the daughter you gave to other people. She said now it's time for all of us to be a real family. Arthur's world collapsed at that moment. His wife, the woman with whom he had built a life for 15 years, had hidden the existence of a daughter. And now, that child was there in front of him, claiming to be his stepdaughter, while his own daughter remained missing. That's impossible, Arthur muttered, grabbing the kitchen table to keep from falling. Helen, tell me this child is lying. Helen continued to sob, unable to form coherent words. Her hands trembled so much that she had to interlace her fingers to try to control them. James watched the scene with a professional expression, but internally prepared for a much more complex case than he had imagined. Mrs. Blackwood, he said gently, I need you to confirm. Is Chloe really your biological daughter? Helen lifted her swollen red eyes, looking at Chloe as if she were seeing a ghost. I don't know. It's been so long. The child I gave up for adoption was a newborn baby. I never saw her again. But Aunt Rose showed me the photo, Chloe said, pulling a yellowed, folded photograph from the pocket of her torn dress. She said, "This is you when you were young and pregnant with me." Arthur took the photo with trembling hands. It was indeed Helen, visibly younger and pregnant in a hospital he didn't recognize. The date on the back indicated 17 years ago. "Where did Rose get this photo?" James asked, examining the image. She said she kept it when she worked at the confectionery house. She found it in a box stored in the attic and knew I was your lost daughter. Arthur felt as if he were living a nightmare. "Helen, you kept photos of the pregnancy in the attic?" "Yes," Helen whispered. I couldn't throw them away. It was the only proof she had ever existed. The revelation hit Arthur with devastating force. For all those years, his wife had secretly kept memories of a daughter he never knew existed. How many other secrets were there in their marriage? Chloe approached Helen and extended her small hand, gently touching the crying woman's face. "Aunt Rose said you always cried looking at these photos. She said you wanted me back, but you were afraid to tell the Candy Man." "Don't call me the Candy Man!" Arthur exploded, his frustration finally overflowing. "I have a name!" "And where is Emily? Where is my real daughter?" Chloe recoiled, frightened by the burst of anger. For the first time since she had appeared at the mansion, she showed herself to be truly a 4-year-old child, vulnerable and scared. "The pretty-haired girl is safe," she said with a trembling voice, "but Aunt Rose said you'll only find her when you learn to be a real family." James intervened before Arthur could explode again. "Chloe, can you take us to where Emily is?" "First, I need to take you where Aunt Rose is waiting. She wants to talk to you," Chloe said, pointing to Helen. "She said she has more things to show about my real family." Arthur looked at James in desperation. "This is emotional blackmail. This woman kidnapped my daughter and is using this child to manipulate us." "It could be," James agreed. "But right now, Chloe is our only link to Emily. We need to play her game until we find your daughter." Helen finally managed to control herself enough to speak. "Arthur, I know you're furious with me. I deserve it. But we need to focus on getting Emily back. Later we'll talk about everything. I hid everything you hid." Arthur laughed bitterly. "Helen, how can I trust there aren't other secrets? Other lost daughters? Other obsessed ex-employees you just forgot to mention?" The pain in Helen's eyes was palpable, but Arthur was beyond the point where he could feel compassion. His whole life felt like a lie at that moment. "Aunt Rose said you would get mad," Chloe commented, observing the argument between the adults. "She said men always get mad when they find out women have secrets from before." "And do you agree with your aunt?" James asked, trying to better understand the dynamic between Rose and the child. "I don't know," Chloe answered honestly. "I just want a family. Aunt Rose said if I helped you understand the truth, I could stay in the confectionery house forever with my little sister." Arthur looked at the girl and, for the first time, saw beyond the strangeness of her impossible knowledge. She was just a child, probably manipulated by an unstable woman who had orchestrated this whole situation. "Chloe," he said, lowering his voice, "how long has it been since you've seen Emily?" 2 days. Aunt Rose said she needed to go to a safe place while you learned the important lessons. What kind of safe place? A place where there's a very kind lady who takes care of special children. Aunt Rose said no one will hurt the pretty-haired girl there. James made a quick note. The description suggested Emily might be held in some kind of foster home or with someone Rose knew and trusted. "Chloe, can you take us to this kind lady?" James asked. "I can't. I only know it's far from here, in a place with lots of yellow flowers. Aunt Rose said you first need to talk to her about all the hidden truths." Arthur felt a mix of hope and despair. Emily was alive and apparently safe, but she remained a hostage in a situation he didn't fully understand. "Where does Rose want to meet us?" Helen asked, wiping her face with a tissue. "At the old church near the cemetery. She said holy places are better for telling difficult truths." James knew the place. It was the St. Lawrence Basilica, a historic structure near the municipal cemetery in Asheville. An isolated place, perfect for a conversation without interference. Let's go, Arthur decided. If that's what we need to do to get Emily back, then let's go. The drive to the church was tense and silent. Chloe had insisted on sitting on Helen's lap, who held her with a mixture of instinctive maternal tenderness and devastating guilt. Arthur drove with a clenched jaw, processing the turn his life had taken in a matter of hours. James watched everything from the passenger seat, mentally recording every detail that might be important later. There was something about the whole story that didn't quite fit, but he couldn't pinpoint what. When they arrived at the basilica, they found Rose sitting on the stone steps at the entrance. The woman of about 45 had aged visibly since she had worked for the Blackwoods. Her graying hair was disheveled, her clothes rumpled, and there was a disturbing intensity in her eyes. "Helen," Rose said, standing up slowly, "it took you a long time to accept the truth." "Rose, where is my daughter?" Arthur demanded, advancing toward the woman. "Your daughter is safe," Rose answered calmly. "But first you need to understand that Chloe is also a child of this family. You abandoned one child and raised another, thinking you could simply forget the past." Helen got out of the car, still carrying Chloe, who watched the reunion with wide, attentive eyes. "Rose, how did you find out about her?" "I always knew you were hiding something," Rose replied. "The way you looked at Emily, as if you were seeing another child through her. And when I found those photos in the attic, it all made sense. But how are you sure that Chloe is really my daughter? There could be other children." Rose smiled with a mixture of triumph and sadness. "Because I worked at the hospital where you gave birth. I was a nurse's aide at the time, and I remember perfectly the day you gave up your newborn daughter. The final revelation struck everyone like a bolt of lightning." Rose hadn't discovered Chloe by chance. She had been present at the most painful moment of Helen's life, had witnessed the child's abandonment, and now returned to collect an emotional debt no one else knew existed. The silence that followed Rose's revelation was deafening. Helen staggered, nearly dropping Chloe from her arms, while Arthur tried to process the magnitude of the situation. Rose had orchestrated everything from the beginning, driven by an obsession born 17 years ago. "You were there when Helen murmured, her voice breaking. "I was there when you cried holding your daughter for the last time," Rose confirmed, her eyes shining with a morbid intensity. "I saw how you begged your parents to let you keep her, and I saw how they tore her from your arms." James approached cautiously, keeping his hands visible. His experience told him he was dealing with someone in an unstable mental state, driven by a dangerous fixation. "Rose, where exactly is Emily?" he asked in a calm voice. "She's learning to be a sister," Rose replied enigmatically. "Agnes Miller is taking care of her in Charlotte, teaching her about family responsibility." Arthur frowned. "Agnes Miller? Who is that woman?" "A retired nurse who worked with me at the hospital. She always wanted children but could never have any. When I told her about your situation, she agreed to take care of Emily temporarily." "Temporarily?" Arthur exploded. "You kidnapped my daughter." "I reunited a family," Rose corrected firmly. "You had 2 daughters and only knew one. That was unfair to Chloe." Chloe, who had remained quiet throughout the conversation, finally spoke. "Aunt Rose, can I see my little sister now? I did everything you asked." Rose knelt to the child's level, stroking her disheveled hair with a tenderness that contrasted disturbingly with the situation. "You were perfect, my dear. But now the adults need to make some important decisions." Arthur watched the interaction and felt a new wave of anger. "You used a 4-year-old child to execute your sick plan. You trained her to manipulate us. I taught Chloe about her real family," Rose defended herself. "For months I told her stories about you, showed her photos, taught her about Emily's habits. Chloe deserved to know her origin. Helen finally found her voice. "Rose, you had no right to do this. Regardless of my past, you can't destroy my family." "Destroy?" Rose laughed bitterly. "I am completing your family. For 17 years, you lived a lie, pretending Chloe didn't exist. Now you have a chance to correct that mistake." James decided to intervene before the situation deteriorated further. "Mrs. Rose, I need you to give me the exact address where Emily is. We can discuss Chloe's situation later, but first we need to ensure Emily is safe." Rose hesitated for a moment, then took a crumpled paper from her pocket. 247 Acacia Street, Charlotte. "Agnes is taking good care of her, but Emily has been crying a lot. She misses her family." Arthur took the paper with trembling hands and immediately called the police, giving the address and quickly explaining the situation. While he was on the phone, he watched Chloe, who was playing with small pebbles on the church floor. "Helen," Rose said, ignoring Arthur, "you always knew this day would come. Deep in your heart, you always hoped your first daughter would come home." Helen looked at Chloe and felt a deep pain in her chest. It was true. For all those years, she had wondered about the fate of the daughter she had given up for adoption. Every one of Chloe's birthdays had been a day of silent mourning. "But not like this," Helen whispered. "Not by destroying my current family, not by scaring Emily." "Emily wasn't scared," Chloe said unexpectedly, looking up from her pebbles. "She was happy when she found out she had a sister. She said she always wanted to have a younger sister." Arthur crouched down to Chloe's level. "Did you really talk to Emily?" "Yes. We played together for 2 days before Aunt Rose took her to Grandma Agnes's house. Emily taught me how to draw flowers and birds." The simplicity of Chloe's words contrasted dramatically with the complexity of the situation. Here was a child who had been deprived of a family, being used in an emotional blackmail scheme, but who could still find joy in the idea of having a sister. 2 hours later, Arthur and Helen were driving to Charlotte, followed by James in another car. Rose had been taken by the police for questioning, and Chloe was under the temporary care of Child Protective Services. The address led them to a simple but well-kept house with a garden full of yellow flowers. Agnes Miller, a 68-year-old woman with white hair and kind eyes, greeted them at the door with a look of relief. "You must be Emily's parents," she said. "The girl has been talking about you constantly." Emily appeared behind Agnes, visibly subdued but physically unharmed. When she saw her parents, she ran into their arms, crying copiously. "Daddy, Mummy, I was so scared," Emily sobbed. "Mrs. Rose said you wanted me to meet my sister, but then she brought me here and wouldn't let me call home." Arthur hugged his daughter tightly, feeling a mixture of immense relief and residual anger. "You're safe now, my darling. We'll never let anything like this happen again." Agnes explained that she had been deceived by Rose, who had told a story about Emily being an orphaned child in need of temporary care. "I realized something was wrong when the girl started talking about the family waiting for her at home. I was going to call you tomorrow." During the trip back to Asheville, Emily asked a question that would change everything. "Mommy, is it true that Chloe is my sister? She told me you gave her away to other people when she was a baby." Helen closed her eyes, fighting back tears. It was the moment of ultimate truth. "Yes, Emily. Chloe is your older sister. I was very young when she was born, and I made the mistake of letting them take her away." "But can she stay with us now?" Emily asked with the typical innocence of her 9 years. "She draws very beautiful birds and said she always wanted a family." Arthur looked in the rear view, a mirror at his daughter, then at Helen. Despite all the pain and betrayal he had discovered, one thing was clear. Chloe was just a victim in the hands of an unstable woman. And if she was truly Helen's daughter, then she was also his responsibility. "We'll talk about it at home," he said finally. "But first, your mother and I need to have a very long conversation about honesty and trust." 3 weeks later, Chloe was officially living with the Blackwood family. DNA tests confirmed she was indeed Helen's biological daughter. Rose was convicted of kidnapping but received psychological counseling, revealing that her obsession had been triggered by the loss of her own child years before. Arthur and Helen went through months of couples therapy, slowly rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. Helen worked daily to earn her husband's forgiveness, while they both learned to be parents to a traumatized child who was discovering what it meant to have a family. Emily became the best sister Chloe could wish for, teaching her about family life and helping her overcome the traumas of abandonment. Chloe, in turn, brought a different perspective on gratitude and resilience that enriched the whole family. Arthur's confectionery business grew and prospered, and he established a support program for vulnerable women, inspired by Rose's story and determined to turn his pain into something positive. On Christmas Eve that year, Arthur watched his 2 daughters decorating the tree together, Emily patiently teaching Chloe about each ornament. Helen was in the kitchen, preparing traditional sweets, humming a song that both girls had learned to love. Despite all the suffering they had faced, Arthur realized that his family was more complete than he had ever imagined possible. It had cost a lot to get there. He had almost lost everything, but now, watching Chloe finally smile without fear and Emily protectively love her new younger sister, he knew that all their pain had been worth it. Some families were born together. Others, like his, had to be won through forgiveness, truth, and the courage to accept that true love sometimes arrived in unexpected and painful ways. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story with a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.